Tonight on Reporting Scotland, the Scottish and Welsh governments set out their amendments to key Brexit legislation to avoid a so-called power grab. Also in the programme, calls for action to combat the risk of people suffering life-changing strokes.
I just couldn't understand what was wrong with me. I couldn't get up, I couldn't do anything, and it was a horrendous time.
Calls for Sky to be given priority funding to help cope with the record number of visitors. And the boy from Tyree who's off to Japan to compete in the World Surfing Championships. Good evening. The First Ministers of Scotland and Wales have written to the Prime Minister setting out their proposed amendments to key Brexit legislation to avoid a so-called power grab. They've highlighted more than 100 areas where they claim UK ministers want to take control of devolved policy. But UK ministers say devolved parliaments will be enhanced by Brexit. Here's our political correspondent, Andrew Kerr.
It's high in the hills where the first impacts of Brexit will be felt in the farming community. The First Ministers of Scotland and Wales are writing to the Prime Minister, complaining of a Brexit power grab by Westminster. They're being forced down a route they don't want to take, as powers from Brussels are returned to London and not Edinburgh and Cardiff. As the power struggle continues, the NFU have their concerns about this row and indeed Brexit.
I think ever since I got this role as President of NFU Scotland, I've been getting a sense of frustration. And it is down purely to the politics. And I totally understand and buy into why they're so keen and so hard on their politics. That's what their careers are. That's what they're making their lives out of. But I think we need to get past the politics and get sorted out on this.
Scottish ministers are highlighting 111 key areas where they think UK government ministers are encroaching. Agriculture and fisheries are two of the big sectors, but the list covers a wide range of topics. We've got flood management, fracking, and also football disorder. So that's the problem. The solution, according to the governments of Scotland and Wales, these 38 amendments published today that they hope Westminster will take on board and change the bill. The objective, to ensure devolved policy areas come back and the devolution settlement is protected. If not, the governments will withhold their consent and say the bill shouldn't be approved.
But I'm absolutely clear, the withdrawal bill will have to change, because if it does not change, there will not be a legislative consent motion. That is a reality. I laid that out last week. Now, I'm open to discussing how the bill can change, and I'm open to ideas from elsewhere, but I think it's rather foolish to say it won't change, because if it doesn't change, then we won't assent to it.
And the First Minister of Wales emphasised the united front as he issued this warning in the Welsh Senate.
Now, we are ready and willing to work constructively with the UK government to reach agreement on the bill, but if they continue to plough on regardless, they'll spark a constitutional crisis, which they don't need and we do not want.
Damien Green, the First Secretary of State, wasn't available for interview. In fact, no one from the UK government was. In a statement, he said the most important thing was to find common UK approaches on issues such as food labelling, so new barriers to trade aren't erected. And he promised jam tomorrow, saying powers would indeed be transferred to the devolved governments. As Brexit looms on the horizon, this is an issue that demands agreement and perhaps compromise. Ministers here will hold talks with the Scottish Conservatives on Thursday. Andrew Kerr, Reporting Scotland.
Well, let's talk to our political editor, Brian Taylor. Brian, the UK government can legally do what it likes over these powers. So what is the tactic, what's the strategy being applied by the devolved parliaments?
They can, whatever Mike Russell says, whatever Carwyn Jones says in Cardiff Bay, there is no veto for the devolved administrations. Westminster is sovereign and the UK government can go ahead, but they don't want to do it over the heads of the devolved territories. Frankly, the UK government's in enough of a stink over Brexit as it is without picking a fight with the Scotland and Wales in terms of the way it is put through. But you hear the concerns there from Scotland and Wales. One Scottish government source said to me that when he looked at the wider range of powers that were being, if you like, withheld potentially from Scotland, it was putting devolution back in its box.
And there are those, Brian, who claim that these 100 areas are just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, one suggestion made by the Scottish Government in the detail, looking at the detail of the withdrawal bill, is that a concern is that the so-called Henry VIII powers, give powers to the executive at Westminster, would allow them subsequently, after Brexit, to be able to make changes to legislation affecting Scotland and to be able to prevent the Scottish Government and Scottish Parliament from making changes to the European Union regulations. Otherwise, the interference would continue. Now, the response from the UK Government to that is to say that these are common sense proposals seeking a UK-wide framework on issues like food labelling and agriculture. They say it would be damaging to business if that doesn't happen, and they accuse their counterparts in the devolved territories of sowing division. Both Scotland and Wales say in response to that they are willing to deal on a UK-wide framework, but they wanted to start from the ground up, from the devolved territories up, rather than be in a diktat from Westminster. This is a fundamental dispute. There are talks with Damien Green, the First Secretary, on Monday, but this is going to be a difficult one to resolve.
Brian Taylor, thank you. A detainee has been found dead at the Dungavel Immigration Detention Centre in South Lanarkshire. A 13-year-old boy described as a promising young pupil has died after being found unconscious at home. 3 nurses have been ordered to pay more than £4,000 in charges to the parking operators at Dundee's Ninewells Hospital. Indigo Park Services launched a civil action at the city's Sheriff Court after claiming the nurses parked without valid tickets. The 3 argued the charges were unreasonable and said signs stating the terms of the charges were unclear. Sheriff Lorna Drummond QC ruled in the parking company's favour. An Aberdeen-bound plane was diverted to Edinburgh Airport after a suspected technical problem on board. More Scots are surviving strokes, but we're not recovering as well as patients elsewhere in the UK. Well, now the Stroke Association says more money is needed to research exactly what triggers different kinds of strokes and what can be done to prevent them. Aileen Clark reports.
Hugo. No, here. That's a boy.
Nothing would make Charlie happier than to be able to take his golden retriever Hugo out for a walk. But since collapsing with a stroke 7 years ago, Charlie from Bishopton has still great difficulty walking.
I came down to have dinner with my wife and couldn't face the dinner, and I just collapsed coming through from the dining room into the living room, and my whole left side, right hand side of my body just gone.
Charlie was 54 at the time and completely shocked by what had happened.
I just couldn't understand what was wrong with me. I couldn't get up, I couldn't do anything, and it was a horrendous time.
The Stroke Association say Charlie is one of around 124,000 stroke survivors in Scotland right now, and more can be done to help them and prevent others from getting strokes in the first place.
Less people are dying of stroke than they used to do, but we do not have as good as outcomes as the rest of the UK at the moment. The health boards and the local authorities are under severe financial pressures at the moment, so money that's around to invest in stroke support after stroke and after discharge from hospital has diminished.
The Scottish Government points out the number of Scots having strokes has decreased over the last decade, and they do have a national stroke plan in place.
When a stroke strikes, the damage spreads like a fire in the brain.
While campaigning for better stroke support and raising funds for research into different kinds of stroke, the charity is also urging all of us to be aware of how dangerous high blood pressure can be.
It was a life-changing experience. My wife and I were very sociable, we did a lot of travelling, that all went away. The weather affects my stroke, the energy, the fatigue it causes, it just caused everything, it just changed everything.
Aileen Clark, reporting Scotland.
Now, it's a problem that the majority of sports fans say they've witnessed. Homophobic behaviour on the terraces and in changing rooms across Scotland. There are calls for Sky to be given priority funding to help it cope with its popularity as Scotland's second top tourist destination. A sailor has died after his dinghy overturned in the Cromarty Firth. The family of a 9-year-old girl who died at her home in Glasgow last week say she passed away peacefully. The Scottish Greens say £200 million a year could be raised for public services by taxing derelict land. They say bringing vacant land into the non-domestic rate system could raise cash to build affordable homes. The Scottish Government says it will construct 50,000 affordable homes during this Parliament. Sport now, and the first of this week's League Cup quarter-finals get underway tonight. We're now to a contest of a different kind. Nature's Battle of the Squirrels is usually characterised as the dominant grey incomers growing in numbers while the indigenous reds decline. An ice sculpture trail and a giant advent calendar are some of the plans for Edinburgh's Christmas festival. Well, talking of cold, could this young man do for surfing what Andy Murray has done for tennis in Scotland? And that is Reporting Scotland. Our next main update is just after the 10 o'clock news.